By 1944, United States Army provost marshals were documenting more than 40,000 cases of unauthorized weapons in the European theater alone. Army Regulation 6-100-35 stated it plainly. No soldier shall carry, modify, or retain any firearm, blade, or explosive device not issued through official ordnance channels. Violations carried real teeth confiscation on the spot, loss of pay, courts-martial, and in extreme cases, reassignment to penal labor units behind the lines. But the records show something else entirely. When the bodies were searched after Bastogne, after Tarawa, after the Hurtgen forest armorers found German pistols tucked into American webbing, trench knives that no quartermaster had ever signed for, shotguns the Geneva Protocol had condemned as inhumane back in 1925, the men carried them anyway. Some because regulation gear had failed them in the mud, some because a captured Luger felt better in a frozen hand than a government-issued sidearm, and some because at 3 in the morning, in a foxhole half flooded with snowmelt, the only thing standing between a young man and a German patrol was a weapon he was never supposed to own. These are the 10 forbidden weapons of the Second World War, the ones soldiers refused to give up, the ones command never could control. We begin at number 10. Number 10. The privately purchased Colt 1911. Officially, every American officer and select enlisted man was issued the standard Colt 45 automatic from government arsenals. Unofficially, thousands of soldiers shipped overseas carrying 1911s bought from civilian gun stores back in Ohio, in Texas, in Pennsylvania. Army regulation forbade it. The serial numbers did not match unit rosters. Repair parts could not be drawn through ordnance, and if a man fell in combat, his family had no legal claim to the weapon's return. But the records show why they did it. Factory-issued 1911s, mass-produced under wartime contracts, suffered from loose tolerances and inconsistent timing. A pre-war commercial Colt, hand-fitted in Hartford before 1941, was simply a better pistol. Sergeants in the 1st Infantry Division were documented carrying their own. A lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne jumped into Normandy with a commercial 1911. His father had bought him in 1938. Command knew. Command looked away, because a man who trusted his sidearm fought harder than a man who did not. Number 9. The M3 trench knife with brass knuckles, the unauthorized variant. The official M3 fighting knife, adopted in 1943, was a clean blade with a leather grip. No guard, no knuckle bow. The Army had specifically banned knuckle duster handles after the First World War, citing the Hague Convention's restrictions on weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering. But veterans of the trenches remembered. They remembered the close-quarters horror of 1917, and they remembered the Mark I trench knife, with its cast brass handle shaped into 4 heavy knuckles. By 1943, soldiers were finding them again, pulled from family attics, bought from First World War veterans for a few dollars, smuggled overseas inside duffel bags. Rangers carried them at Pointe du Hoc. Paratroopers carried them at Nijmegen. Let that sink in a weapon ban for being too brutal in the previous war. Was the weapon men chose for the next one. Number 8. The blackjack and the Kosh. These were not weapons of battle. These were weapons of the rear area, and they were utterly forbidden. A blackjack is a small, leather-wrapped lead weight on a flexible handle. A Kosh is its British cousin. Both were designed for one purpose: knocking a man unconscious without killing him, without firing a shot, without leaving a wound that could be traced. Military police carried them officially. Combat soldiers did not. But thousands of GIs picked them up in occupied France, in liberated Belgium, in the alleys of Naples. They used them to settle disputes with black marketeers, to subdue drunk comrades before the MPs arrived, to handle situations that no after-action report would ever describe. Command issued repeated bulletins ordering their surrender. The bulletins were ignored. Would you trust a regulation sling or the one you built yourself? Number 7. The Winchester Model 1912 Trench Gun. In 1918, the German government had filed a formal diplomatic protest. The American combat shotgun, a pump-action 12-gauge loaded with double-aught buckshot, was, in Berlin's view, a violation of the Hague Convention. The German High Command issued an order. Any American soldier captured carrying a shotgun would be summarily executed. The Americans never withdrew the weapon. They simply stopped talking about it. By the Pacific War, the shotgun was back officially this time, in limited issue. The Winchester 12, the Stevens 520, the Ithaca 37. Marines loved them. In the jungle, at 5 paces, with visibility cut to nothing by rain and root and shadow, a shotgun did what a rifle could not. But the unauthorized shotguns were the interesting ones. Sailors carried sawed-off civilian models smuggled aboard ship. Army cooks kept double barrels behind mess tents in New Guinea. A staff sergeant on Guadalcanal was documented carrying a 16-gauge Browning auto. 5 his uncle had shipped him in pieces inside coffee tins. The Japanese never issued the execution order the Germans had threatened. But every American who carried an unauthorized shotgun knew the story and carried it anyway. Number 6. Hand-loaded and modified ammunition. This was perhaps the most quietly forbidden practice of the entire war. Soldiers cutting crosses into the noses of full metal jacket rounds, filing the tips off bullets to create expanding wounds, reversing rounds in their casings to fire them backward, base first, for catastrophic terminal effect at close range. The Hague Convention of 1899 had explicitly banned expanding bullets. Every signatory nation, including the United States, was bound by it. Possession of modified ammunition could mean a court-martial. The records from the Pacific show otherwise. Marines on Peleliu were found with cartridge belts of cross-cut rounds. Army snipers in the Hurtgen Forest reversed pistol cartridges for emergency close-range encounters. A medic in the 101st Airborne was documented carrying 10 rounds of dum-dum ammunition in a small tin labeled aspirin. Why? Because the enemy was not always a soldier in uniform standing at distance. Sometimes the enemy was 3 feet away, in the dark, and the only thing that would stop him was a bullet that did more than punch a clean hole. Number 5. The captured German stick grenade. The Model 24 steel hand granate, the iconic potato masher, was a German weapon. American soldiers were strictly forbidden from carrying enemy ordnance. The reasons were practical. Captured grenades had unknown fuse delays. They might have been tampered with by retreating troops. They could detonate prematurely in a man's belt. But American soldiers carried them by the thousands. The reason was simple physics. The German stick grenade could be thrown nearly twice as far as the American Mark II Pineapple, 40 yards versus 25. In the close country of the Ardennes, in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the rubble of Aachen, that extra 15 yards was the difference between killing the enemy and being killed by him. Officers saw the stick grenades hanging from American webbing and said nothing. Number 4. The Luger P-08, the trophy that became a sidearm. No weapon was more coveted by American soldiers in the European theater than the German Luger pistol. The toggle-action 9mm, with its distinctive raked grip and its mechanical precision, was the war souvenir every GI wanted to bring home. But many did not wait until the war was over. They carried it. Regulation forbade the use of enemy sidearms in combat. The reasons were sound. Enemy weapons could not be supplied with ammunition through American channels. A captured 9mm round might be subsonic, might be steel-cored, might be reloaded with corroded powder pulled from a depot in Bavaria, and in the chaos of a firefight, the sharp crack of a German pistol could draw American return fire from a friendly unit 50 yards away. It did not matter. Officers carried Lugers. Sergeants carried Lugers. A captain in the 4th Armored Division was killed near Bastogne with a Luger still holstered on his hip, his issued .45 untouched in a footlocker back at the battalion aid station. The records show why. The Luger was lighter than the Colt. Its grip angle pointed naturally at a target, and for a man who had taken it from the body of an SS officer at Falaise, carrying it was something more than practical. It was a private declaration. The enemy's weapon turned back against him. Number 3. The flamethrower, modified beyond regulation. The M1A1 portable flamethrower was a sanctioned weapon. Its use was not. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 did not explicitly ban flame weapons, but customary international law treated them with deep suspicion. Several Allied nations restricted their deployment to fortified positions only. The Americans had no such restriction in the Pacific, and in the Pacific, the flamethrower was modified. Combat engineers field-stripped the regulation fuel mixture, a thickened napalm gel, and rebuilt it with diesel, with gasoline, with crude petroleum drained from captured Japanese stocks. They extended the burn time. They increased the range from 20 yards to nearly 40. They removed safety interlocks that prevented the weapon from firing at low pressure. A flame operator on Iwo Jima was documented carrying a tank rebuilt 3 times in the field, with a hand-soldered nozzle his ordnance company had never seen. None of it was authorized. All of it worked. The cost was paid in different ways. Field-modified flamethrowers exploded. Operators burned. But the cave and bunker fighting of the Pacific demanded a weapon command had not provided, and combat engineers built it themselves. If you have made it this far, you understand this is not about heroes or villains. It is about choices made under pressure. Stay with me. Number 2. The double-edged commando dagger, the Fairbairn Sykes, in American hands. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife was a British design. Long, slender, double-edged from tip to guard, balanced for a single purpose: silent killing. The United States Army never officially issued it. The Army's position was that double-edged blades were classified as offensive weapons under the Hague Conventions, vague prohibitions on weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering, a phrase that could mean anything or nothing, depending on who was reading it. But the OSS issued them. The 1st Special Service Force carried them, and by 1944, every Ranger who could trade for one did. A staff sergeant in the 2nd Ranger Battalion at Pointe du Hoc was found, after the assault, with a Fairbairn Sykes strapped inside his boot. The blade was bent. The grip was wrapped in friction tape. He had used it twice. The Army's official position remained unchanged through the end of the war. The dagger was unauthorized. The dagger was carried anyway. These weapons were not carried by accident. They were carried by choice. And the closer we get to number 1, the higher the stakes become. Number 1. The silenced pistol, the high-standard HDM, and the men who were never supposed to have it. Of every forbidden weapon of the Second World War, none was more tightly controlled than the suppressed firearm. The Hague Convention did not explicitly ban it. The Geneva Protocol did not address it. But every major army, on every side of the war, treated the silenced pistol as something apart, a weapon of espionage, of assassination, of acts that fell outside the rules of soldierly conduct entirely. The Americans built one anyway. The high-standard HDM was a .22 caliber automatic pistol fitted with an integral suppressor, a perforated barrel wrapped in baffles and bronze mesh, reducing the report of the weapon to a sound quieter than a hand clap. It was developed by the Office of Strategic Services in 1943. It was issued to fewer than 3,000 men across the entire war. Officially, the HDM did not exist. It was never listed in ordnance catalogs. It was never mentioned in unit rosters. Soldiers who carried it signed non-disclosure agreements that remained classified until 1976, and the men who carried it were instructed to destroy the weapon or bury it, rather than allow it to be captured. The records that have since been declassified show where it went: into the hands of OSS operatives behind German lines in France. into the satchels of Jedburgh teams parachuted into the Balkans, into the briefcases of intelligence officers in neutral Lisbon and Stockholm. A single HDM was carried into Berlin in the final weeks of the war by a man whose name remains redacted to this day. But the forbidden carrying the part command genuinely feared happened elsewhere. A handful of HDMs escaped OSS inventory. They turned up in the personal effects of paratroopers in Italy. They were found in the footlockers of Marine raiders returning from the Pacific. One was documented in the possession of a military police lieutenant in occupied Berlin in 1946, a man who had no clearance, no assignment, no official reason to own such a weapon. He had simply acquired it. This was what command feared, not the assassinations sanctioned in the dark. Those command had ordered. What command feared was the silenced pistol in the hand of a man who was answerable to no one, a weapon that left no sound, a weapon that left no witness, a weapon that, in the wrong hands at the end of a long and brutal war, could settle private scores that no court would ever hear. The Army recovered what it could. Most of the HDMs in unauthorized hands were never returned. They went home in duffel bags. They were buried in barns in Wisconsin and Tennessee. They surfaced decades later in the estates of dead veterans, pistols their grandchildren had never known existed. The silenced pistol was the forbidden weapon command feared most. Because of every weapon on this list, it was the only one that could be used and never heard. 10 weapons, 10 violations of regulation, of convention, of the rules a young man was supposed to obey when he put on the uniform. And yet, every one of them was carried. Every one of them was used. Every one of them came home, in some form, in some pocket, in some duffel bag stamped with a name that the Army would never quite manage to track. The Second World War was not won by regulation. It was won by men who took regulation as a starting point and then made the small private decisions that regulation could not anticipate. A commercial Colt instead of a contract one. A captured Luger instead of an issued sidearm. A trench knife pulled from a father's footlocker. A stick grenade hung from American webbing because the throw was longer. A silenced pistol that no inventory would ever account for. These were not the choices of heroes. They were not the choices of criminals. They were the choices of ordinary men, in extraordinary places, who understood something the rulebook did not. That survival is not granted by authority. It is taken quietly, individually, weapon by the men who must do the surviving. If that idea matters to you, if you believe the real history of war lives in the gaps between regulation and reality, then you are in the right place. This channel is for the version of history they did not put in the textbooks. Next time, we go deeper. The forbidden inventions of the Third Reich, the weapons, even the Germans were afraid to deploy. Until then,